A nurse washed a billionaire at dawn, and he opened his eyes to a question no one expected. The private suite smelled faintly of antiseptic and citrus from a diffuser, the blinds filtering a reluctant morning light into a room that should have felt secure but hummed with the low, steady sound of machines. Sarah Reed moved like she always had on night shifts, slippers soft against the vinyl floor, hair tied back, the weight of her keys a small comfort in the pocket of her scrubs. The summons came on a Tuesday evening when the neurologist asked, quietly and with a look that meant more than words, if she could take a case that required discretion. She accepted with a throat that tightened. She would care for Michael Hayes, and what happened next would pull at every certainty she held about power, trust, and what it means to be seen. The suite was locked behind a corridor that smelled of expensive soap and hospital linen. Outside the room, the city sounded distant, a low pulse of cars and a siren cut in the night. Inside the room, the heart monitor ticked like a metronome, a ribbon of numbers and green light that kept making the small mechanical promise that time would be counted. Michael lay on his back, the face of a man who had lived in headlines, but who now had the slack, vulnerable features of someone suspended between breathing and not. IV lines trailed from his arm, the saline bag a pale constellation above the bedside. Sarah smoothed the sheet and felt, absurdly, like she was smoothing the pages of a life that might still write itself. Sarah had learned early to read the small things. She noticed the tremor of fingers under sheets, a breath that came a fraction of a second late, the way a pulse could falter when a door closed. She worked at St. Mark Private until 3 years ago, and then moved to the city hospital, where private rooms for powerful people stayed clean and anonymous. She was not interested in wealth. Her hands had room only for the work itself and the people at the center of it. Yet something about the request that evening felt like a call to be present in a way she had not been before. The promise of the story was simple. Care, persistence, and attention to the smallest signals could reveal truths that records and bank statements might try to hide. Could care be a kind of investigation, too? Backstory. Sarah had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone and every wound was tended by neighbors before doctors arrived. In her first paragraph of memory, she remembered the black and white television in her grandmother's kitchen and the scent of lemon oil when the family scrubbed the floor on Sundays. She learned to be useful because being useful meant being loved. In the second paragraph, she trained as a nurse after high school, worked nights to pay tuition, and kept a battered copy of a nursing textbook in her bag like a talisman. She worked in geriatric wards and then in emergency, each patient teaching her the quiet vocabulary of touch and listening. In the third paragraph, she carried those impulses into the city, where she became known for staying the extra moments, for telling visiting families what the monitors already suggested, and for refusing to let a chart replace a conversation. That history was not heroic on the surface, but it made her relentless about noticing things others passed by. The summons itself began in Dr. Aaron Harris' office, where the lights hummed softer than the corridor. He slid a thin folder across the desk, and his voice had the brittle calm of someone who had spent too many hours explaining bad odds. "He is secure placed," he said. "Private suite. We need a steady hand. There is also sensitivity. Mr. Hayes is not a patient for publicity." Sarah looked at the file and saw the name that had been on magazine covers, the man who had built an empire from software and real estate. "Why me?" she asked, and her fingers traced the edge of her own badge. "Because," Dr. Harris said, "you listen." Maria Ortega, the head nurse, introduced Sarah to the team in the hallway. "You will have support from Daniel in physiotherapy and Lydia on nights," Maria said, tapping the roster. "We will rotate, but you are the primary caregiver for now." Nathan Cole, the estate manager, had already left instructions about privacy, and Claire Hayes, his sister, had requested limited visitors. The file was clinical, but the subtext hummed. Power did not make one immune to the silence of coma, and sometimes power brought enemies who preferred to manipulate the vulnerable. The routine settled into rhythms. Bathing Michael started as a matter of dignity and became a ritual where Sarah tried to reverse anonymity into personhood. She set the water at a temperature that smelled faintly of bergamot, let a cloth trace the jawline that had once been so sure and precise, hummed songs under breath when the room felt too clinical. Daniel Ruiz, the physiotherapist, came twice a week and worked with passive range of motion, bending fingers, flexing toes, whispering instructions that were meant to coax synapses into remembering movement. Lydia, a night nurse, always joked about Sarah's tea habit and brought stories about the staff to break the hush. Claire Hayes visited twice a week and read from a thin book of poems, her voice careful and sometimes faltering. Michael's hands were pale, his nails clean, and there were moments when a finger would twitch and the heart monitor would deepen its rhythm. Those micro movements were small and then not small. The first time his index finger flexed, Sarah felt as if something had rearranged in the room. She paused and let sounds register. The hum of the ventilator, the slow wheeze of the building's air conditioners, the soft click of the IV pump. Each sound was a thread she could pull to find more. Dialogue in the routine scenes grew like a filament of attention. "How long has he been like this?" Claire asked one afternoon, the poem folding forgotten in her lap. 3 months, Sarah said, fingers on a wrist as if checking a pulse that belonged to both. "Will he remember anything?" Claire whispered. "Hard to say," Dr. Harris answered on the phone from the corridor. "Neurology is patient. We are cautious." "Do you think someone did this?" Nathan asked while rearranging a set of papers that smelled faintly of old ink. "We are looking into it," Maria said. "There are entries in the records that do not add up." "Records are paper," Nathan said, "and paper burns easier than people." His laugh was thin. Sarah looked at Michael and whispered, "I will keep you warm," not sure whether she spoke to him or to herself. Small signs accumulated. A cough that sounded more purposeful than reflexive. A tear that tracked down a cheek when Claire read a certain line. A state of alert when the room door opened. Tests followed. EEGs recorded waves of asleep and lighter asleep. Scans that radiologists explained in quiet, measured tones. "We are seeing intermittent activity," Dr. Harris said, leaning over images like a sculptor studying marble. "There are islands of responsiveness, nothing conclusive but more than total silence." He explained the terms in language Sarah understood. An EEG measures electrical activity in the brain. A CT rules out bleeding, and an MRI gives a map of soft tissue. He used the word prognosis and then tempered it. Prognosis is probability, not destiny. The explanation sat in the air like a formal pronouncement, softened by coffee breath. There were also financial records that Nathan handed over reluctantly, folders of transfers and emails. Sarah would look at numbers, not because she cared for ledgers, but because sometimes numbers told of pressure beneath a glossy surface. The tension of those discoveries pulled the narrative towards something larger than one bedside. One night, when the rain made the city outside liquefy its lights into an impressionist smear, Sarah noticed Michael's hand curled around the pillow tougher than usual. She adjusted it, and he sighed, a small sound that seemed borrowed from a life outside the room. He had been in coma after an accident that no one in his public circle liked to discuss. The first scene of overt miracle occurred as she washed him. His eyes fluttered like shutters and then opened to the gray of the ceiling. For a long beat, he looked through the ceiling as if trying to place himself. The heart monitor sped and then steadied. The room exhaled as a thing. A nurse screamed softly and then suppressed it. Daniel knocked over a stool in the corridor and then apologized as if embarrassed at sound. "Where am I?" he said hoarsely. "You are safe," Sarah replied, a hand on his forehead. "My name is Sarah." He blinked at her, and the look in his eyes held the possibility of recognition. Scenes of awakening demand dialogue that is quick and dense. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your nurse," Sarah said. "I have been here with you." "Money," he rasped. "Company," he tried. "Sip water," Claire said, pressing the cup to his lips. "Be patient." Dr. Harris arrived, stethoscope at his neck, voice taut and professional. "We will need scans," he said. "He is awake but fragile." The exchanges were rapid, and the room felt like a held breath being released. At about 1/3 of the way into their shared days, the story needs you to become part of the conversation. If this has moved you, know you are not alone. Tell us in the comments if you have ever believed in something because someone kept believing for you. Start your reply with "I believe" or "I saw," so we can read and build a space of stories that remind us why small acts matter. Your memories help us find threads that keep others warm when they cannot warm themselves. Now listen to the next part, because the tiny sign you saw earlier would soon become the hinge for everything that followed. As Michael regained words and memory, he also began to recall sequences that did not fit an accident. He spoke of driving home and of brakes that did not respond. The word sabotage came like a cold stone. At first, the team listened as they would any confused recollection. Then Nathan produced an internal maintenance log that contradicted the public one, emails timestamped at odd hours, and a repair invoice that had been altered. Sarah watched him read and felt the room tilt toward a different kind of urgency. There were other names in those messages. Victor Stone, the CFO, who had argued with Michael months before. Olivia Grant, a board member who had advocated for a risky merger. And Ethan Park, a contractor whose crews had accessed company vehicles. Each name layered motive with opportunity. The evidence was paper and digital, but it needed context to breathe. They would need forensics and a police report that held up in court. The investigation scenes were clinical and human. A forensics team photographed the car, and a mechanic Sarah met in a garage described brake lines in terms that made her palms sweat. "If someone tampers with the master cylinder, the pedal goes soft," the mechanic said. Sarah asked for a simple explanation, and he obliged. The hospital legal team, led by attorney Marcus Hale, coordinated with Officer May Park from the city police. Park was patient and methodical, a presence in a trench coat who asked 100 questions and took nothing at face value. "We will subpoena maintenance logs and look for financial incentives," she told Nathan. The mingling of bedside care and legal process felt strange to Sarah. She washed Michael and then sat with Nathan while he explained transfer sheets. And the numbers started to form a pattern. In the legal domain, the word sabotage meant intentional damage designed to cause failure. It was a crime that could carry heavy penalties depending on evidence and intent. Within 2 weeks, warrants were signed, and a search turned up emails on a personal account that pointed to a directive to delay maintenance the night before the crash. Tension rose in 2 tight paragraphs. The first came when Victor Stone, called in for questioning, denied everything, and then left the building in a car that rattled through puddles like a threat. His face was controlled, but his fingers trembled as if he'd left something inside him. The second tension came in a meeting at the hospital, where an anonymous donor threatened to pull funding if the story went public. The staff felt squeezed between truth and the survival of the institution. "Do we protect the patient or the purse?" Maria asked quietly. Sarah found that question harder to answer than she expected. Confrontation arrived on a gray morning. Officer Park had tracked financial transfers to an offshore account, and surveillance had placed a maintenance worker with access to company vehicles at the garage the night before the crash. Victor Stone pleaded not guilty at first. Then nervousness cracked his composure when presented with timestamps and personal correspondence. "I issued the memo. I did for profits. No one denies that," he said in his office. "But sabotage," he spat, "is a word used for theater." In the interview room, his voice broke. "I signed a paper that allowed cuts. I did not touch brakes." Under pressure, Victor named Ethan Park as a subcontractor who had complained of payments withheld. Ethan was detained for questioning and broke in the 3rd paragraph of the interrogation, eyes ringed with red. "They told me to loosen lines, to delay until after the demo," he said. "I thought it was a prank. I did not mean harm." Arrests followed for those who conspired to delay maintenance and alter records. It was not a tidy unraveling, but justice began to align with facts. Throughout the investigation, the relationship between Sarah and Michael changed and deepened, not along the lines of employer and nurse, but as two humans who had shared the fragile boundary between life and not. Romance in this story was not sudden. It grew in small, steady exchanges. "Thank you for staying," Michael said one evening, tracing the edge of the blanket. "You told me stories about the city," Sarah replied. He smiled with a sliver of memory. "Tell me about the coffee shop on 7th, he said. "It burned the best espresso," she said. "I will take you there," he murmured, and the promise hung like silk. The courtship contained dialogues that ranged from playful to confessional. "Do you regret the life you built?" he asked, voice low. "No," Sarah said. "I regret nothing. I only wish for moments like this to be more honest." He reached for her hand in a gesture small enough to be private and profoundly loud to them. A moment of tension returned when the press smelled a leak. Paparazzi circled the hospital, and a repository of messages suggested someone inside had sold the story. The staff tightened security, and Nathan called for an audit. "We need to know who betrayed him," Claire said, voice raw. That betrayal became personal and legal as the hospital worked with authorities to identify the leak. In 2 paragraphs, the narrative shows the sting of public exposure and the fear that truth might be traded for profit in the same way that maintenance had been. The confession scene took place in a small interview room where Ethan admitted his role and Victor faced indictment for conspiracy to commit bodily harm and fraud. "I wanted the company to push a merger," Victor said. "I wanted fewer voices to slow me down." The prosecutors, patient and exacting, outlined how transfer orders and forged maintenance records fit into a pattern of pressure. Nathan cooperated, providing email chains. Marcus Hale, the attorney, worked with Officer Park and the DA to ensure the case held. The legalese was heavy, and the journalists condensed it into headlines that did not contain the nuance the staff had lived. Still, the outcome was concrete. Arrests were made and charges filed. The romance arc resolved not with grand gestures, but with a fragile pledge. On a late afternoon, when light fell across the physiotherapy room in stripes, Michael knelt awkwardly, legs weak but spirit resolute, and asked Sarah a question that she knew would change both their trajectories. "Will you keep being my hand?" he asked, voice threaded with vulnerability. "Will you marry me, not because of money, but because you chose me when I was empty?" The answer came in tears and laughter, and a simple yes. Their conversation folded into multiple exchanges of practicalities and promises. "We will take it slow," Sarah said. "We will do it on the quiet." "No prying cameras," Michael joked. "Only our people," Claire said, smiling through tears. Daniel and Maria clapped softly. Dr. Harris adjusted his glasses and said, "I will be there." Those 8 to 10 dialogue exchanges were small and human, full of subtext and measured breath. The epilogue unfurled over 3 temporal snapshots and totaled a new kind of closure that was less tidy and more honest. 1 month later, Michael was out of the ICU and walking with a cane, counted steps and careful gratitude. He attended briefings with his legal team and with employees to apologize and to restructure oversight at his companies. Sarah taught a small class at the hospital on bedside advocacy and dignity in critical care. Claire organized a family lunch that tasted like triumph and grief. Together, the donor who had threatened to pull funding agreed to keep the physiotherapy center open after a meeting where Michael made a public commitment to fund patient-centered care. The hospital introduced stricter audit procedures for private suites, and Nathan set up a new digital log to track vehicle maintenance. 3 months later, the legal case had progressed and convictions were underway for those who had altered maintenance records and conspired. Victor Stone awaited sentencing, and Ethan, who cooperated fully, received a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony and restitution work to repairs. Sarah and Michael hosted a quiet fundraiser in the hospital atrium where the new physiotherapy wing displayed a plaque that read in modest letters that it had been made possible by the insistence of those who stayed. Officer Park attended and spoke about the difference between careful investigation and vigilante justice. Daniel led a demonstration of rehabilitation techniques for families and doctors alike. Michael returned to work part-time with new priorities centered on employee safety and transparency. The press reported the facts with a mixture of praise and the old appetite for scandal. The staff felt vindicated and cautious with their relief. 6 months later, the lives had shifted in ways that felt durable. Sarah and Michael had married in a small ceremony in the hospital garden, with Claire reading a poem and Maria bringing a cake that tasted of cinnamon and mercy. The physiotherapy center welcomed patients from diverse backgrounds, and Michael's foundation funded scholarships for nurses seeking advanced training in neurology and patient advocacy. Hospital policy changes were adopted in other institutions after the story circulated in medical forums. Nathan continued to manage the estate, but with new oversight and a public statement about ethical responsibility. Officer Park gave a lecture on white-collar crime and the invisible ways harm is inflicted through negligence and greed. Sarah returned to the night shift occasionally to teach, always to remind young nurses that power and vulnerability often share a room and require equal measures of courage and care. A brief technical note about procedure. Forensic investigation of vehicle tampering typically involves an inspection of the brake system, master cylinder, lines, and an analysis of timestamps on maintenance logs. Digital forensics examines metadata in emails and file access logs for anomalies. These processes require chain of custody and corroborating testimony to move from suspicion to charge. Evidence needs contextualization to stand in court. In the end, the story was a mosaic of small acts and large consequences. They had found a truth hidden in invoices and late-night emails and brought it into a courtroom where it could be weighed. They had found a recovery that was part medical miracle and part persistent human attention. The final scene leaves a quiet call to action. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that vigilance matters and that one person staying the course can change the direction of many lives. If you want more stories that blend investigation with human tenderness, subscribe and be part of a community that values care and truth. Sometimes what saves a life is the insistence of someone who simply refuses to look away.